Maseches Bava Kamma Daf Samach is about halachas of Eish. We'll have a few comments on our last Mishnah, 2 questions and answers, and then we'll have another Mishnah discussing the basic halacha of Eish. We'll have some discussion of that, and then a lengthy Agarata related to Psukim discussing Eish. So let's begin. The Gemara has said in our last Mishnah that if somebody blows on the fire, then if he's the last one, then he's responsible for fanning the flames. The word that was used there in our text is liba, for blowing. The Gemara says there's a different version that is niba. So Rabbi Yitzchak says both of them could be correct. Liba means to blow, of course, and like we see that from the pasuk in Shemais that says bilabas eish, with the blowing fire. Also, there's a pasuk that uses niba to mean blowing, and that's bari niv sifasayim, the breath, the wind of his lips, and therefore both of them could validly mean blowing. Okay, next Gemara discusses the halacha which we've seen, that if someone blows and then the wind blows, who's responsible? The Gemara now quotes a brayso and says, what if both of them were blowing together? So the person's blowing, but the wind is helping him. Who's responsible there? So the brayso paskins, it depends. If his blowing had enough force to be able to fan the flames itself, then the wind is irrelevant, then he's chayiv. So the Gemara says, and if not, he's pater. That means if he couldn't blow himself, but together with the wind he did blow it, he's pater for that. Why? We have a similar case where he's chayiv. That case is if somebody's doing the malacha of zayra, that is, he's winnowing crops. So he takes a shovelful of crops, that is the chaff, the broken husks mixed together with the kernels, throws it up in the air, and then the wind blows away the chaff, and the kernels fall to the ground, and that's how he separates it. That's the malacha of Zaira. That is the classic malacha of Zaira. And there, the wind is helping him. He couldn't have done it on his own, and yet he's chayiv for that malacha. So why, over there, if the wind is helping you, you're chayiv, but here, in the case of blowing, if you need the wind's help and you yourself couldn't do it, you're pater. Someone gives 4 answers. The Gemara's first answer is, the first 3 answers are to say the wind is not really helping you here. Abaye says, we're referring to you were blowing from one direction and the wind was blowing from the opposite direction. So you weren't working together at all. Rava says we're referring to where the wind was blowing in a roch she'ena matzuya. You can't be responsible for that. It's not a normal wind. Rabbi Zera says your blowing here didn't really count as anything. You were just breathing on it hard. Tamrei tzamurei, you were just breathing on it. Now, the 4th pshat is a Rashi, and he says, no, in Malachas Shabbos is different, because that's a definition of the malacha. That's Malachas Machsheves. The Torah defines a malacha as your intent to do this malacha. That's what you intended to do. You intended to separate the grain from the chaff by throwing it into the wind. So of course, the wind helping you is the malacha. Here, though, you're just doing your thing, and that is a groma, because the wind is what's actually completing the task, and that's not what you intended. Your intent was not fulfilled. Okay, now let's get to our next Mishnah. And it refers to the Iker halacha, the main halacha of a fire. So it says if somebody sends a fire and it burns branches or stones or dirt, he's chayav on all of these. The Gemara quotes the pasuk that lists 4 things. It says if a fire goes out, that's the expression here, it's important, ki says the eish, a fire goes out, sounds like it goes out on its own, and it finds koitzim v'nechal gadish oy hakama oy hasadeh. So it finds and it eats thorns, it finds thorns, it eats a pile of grain, or standing grain in the field, or a field. Those are the 4 examples. Thorns, piled grain, standing grain, and a field. So it says, Shalim Yishalim Hamamer Sabeira, the one who lit the fire, has to pay for it. So Mara wants to know, first of all, why does he mention all those 4 things? Thorns, piled grain, standing grain, and a field. So Mara says there's a reason that each alone would not have been enough. If the Torah would have only said thorns, I would think that you're only responsible for thorns, because thorns are commonly used to start a fire, and there are fires around thorns all the time. So therefore, it's logical that he was posheya. He brought a fire there, and he wasn't careful with it. So therefore, you would be chayav to pay for that. But if it set fire to the gadish, to the pile of grain, people would probably be careful there. And if a fire started, probably he's an itis. So you would think you would be pater for that. Therefore, the Torah has to mention the gadish. Now, if it would have only said the gadish, I wouldn't know you chayav for thorns. I would say you're only chayav for the grain, the gadish, because it's valuable. Thorns, which is much less value, almost no value, I think that you're pater for that. Now, why does it say kamma? So Gemara says kamma is teaching me something else. For the halacha that fire is only chayav on something which is revealed, something which is hidden, it's not. So kamma is revealed, it's always open, and therefore just like a kamma you're chayav for and it's revealed, you're only chayav on things that are revealed as opposed to things which are hidden inside. So I asked, what about according to Yehuda who says that you are chayav for hidden things? So Gemara says to teach me a different halacha. Just like kamma is something which is standing tall, you're chayav for anything which stands tall, including people, animals, and things of that sort. Or the Rabbanan, where do they learn that. So Gemara says that's not from the fact that it says Oy Hakaba, the extra Oy. Rabbi Yehuda says that's not a drasha because you need Oy to show that it's separate things. You're not chayiv. You're chayiv even if you do each one alone, not only if you do all of them together as a group. Rabbanan say you don't need Oy for that because you have another Oy later. It says Oy Hasada. Rabbi Yehuda says Oy Hasada is not a separate drasha just because we said Oy Hakama, therefore we said Oy Hasada, but you don't learn two separate things from it. Okay, now we know the first three things. Why does it say Sada? That's the fourth one. So Gemara says, Sada is to teach me that you're chayiv for all other types of hesed that fire can do besides burning, such as rocks, plowed fields, things like that can be damaged by a fire in a non-classic way. You're chayiv for that as well. So Gemara says, why don't you just write Sada and I could learn everything else? If you just write Sada, I would think you're only chayiv for something which happens in a field. Things which aren't field related, I wouldn't know, and therefore you have to mention the other things as well. Now the Gemara goes into a Agadata based on this pasuk that we just learned in the Mishnah discussing the chiyuv of the fire. So the Gemara quotes Rishon Bar Nachmani, named Rav Yonason, who says tragedy, paranis, punishment only comes to the world when there are evil people in the world, and it starts from the tzaddikim. How do you see that? Because it says kisei seish. When will a fire go out? Fire here homiletically refers to paranis, refers to tragedy. When it's umatzakaitim, when there are thorns around, thorns referring to evil. When there are evil people around, then the fire is going to go out and destroy. However, where does it begin? It begins from the good people, from the tzaddikim, like it says, v'nechal gadish, which implies in past tense it has already eaten a gadish. Gadish referring to crops, homiletically to the good people. By the time it gets to the thorns, it has already gotten to the gadish before. The Gemara quotes another drasha saying the same point. Rav Yosef said, "What's pshat in that which it says va'atam le'seitu ish pesach beisei ad boiker?" You should not have a person should not leave his house until the morning. It's referring to the night of Yetzias Mitzrayim. That you shouldn't leave because once permission was given to the destroyer to destroy, once the angel of destruction is in the street, he will not separate, will not be able to tell the difference between tzaddikim and rishayim. Tzaddikim will be caught up for a tiny chotasaira and be caught into the iser. Not only that, but it even starts from tzaddikim first because it says v'chrati mimcha tzaddik v'rasha. I'll cut off from you the tzaddik and the rasha, the righteous and the evil. You see, tzaddik is mentioned first. So in that, the Gemara says Rav Yosef cried. He said, for all the work that tzaddikim have put in, why they're considered to be like nothing? Why are they victimized first? Why are they punished first? So Abai says no, it's good for them because the tzaddikim can't bear to see the suffering of the rest of the world, and therefore they are taken away before it begins. Like it says, Ki mipnei hara nesaf tzaddik, before the evil, the tzaddik is collected from the world. Now it says Rabbi Yehuda, the name of Rav, one should always travel during the daylight, not during the night. Like it says, he refers to it as ki toiv. Light is referred to, it says vayar lekim ki toiv. It's referred to as it was a good. A person should always travel during the it was good time. You should get into the city before the sun sets, and you shouldn't leave until the sun rises. Like it says, v'atam le'seitzu ish pesach beisei ad boiker. Same pasuk he's deriving that from. You shouldn't leave your house until the morning. And now the Gemara is going to quote a brisa, which gets into what to do when there is a pandemic in the world. This was very much applicable during the COVID years. The brisa says, if there is a plague in the world, you should draw your legs in, meaning you should stay home. Like it says, you should not leave your house until the morning, during the time when the mashkas was in the streets. It also says, go, my people, into your rooms and lock the door behind you. And it says, outside the sword is wandering, and inside there is fear. So what are all these two other psukim for? So the Gemara says, if you would say, maybe it's only by night, but during the day you're safe. Therefore it says, because the other pasuk is only referring to at night. So to include also during the day, we bring the second pasuk. And the third one is because if you may think that the only time you should go in is if there is fear in the streets, but not inside the house. What if there's fear inside the house also? Should you go into the house? Maybe you should go out amongst the street. Fear here refers to the mashkas. Maybe I should therefore go out to be amongst people in the street and not home alone. It says no, you should be home alone. Better avoid the crowds during the time of plague. And therefore it says there's a sword outside on the street, even though there is an ema inside, still avoid the outside and the street. Rava, during a time of plague, would lock his windows, like it says, Ki olamavas b'chalanenu, the death enters through our windows. Gemara now brings a brisa about hunger, a time of a famine. So the brisa says when there is a famine in the city, spread out your legs, that is, go out, travel out, be around, be out. Like it says, V'hirav ba'aretz v'yired Avram etayma. There was hunger in the land, and Avram went to Egypt. V'yagar sham, and he lived over there. He traveled away. You find that also another pasuk on that. It says when the Mitzarim were outside the city in the time of the famine, and they said we shouldn't stay here and die here, we shouldn't go into the city and die because of the hunger, and they decided to go to the camp of the enemy. So over there they said, if we will say go into the city, there's a famine in the city itself, of Amasnu Sham, I will die there. So this is the second pasuk showing you should travel, go somewhere else when there's a famine. So Mar says, why do we need two psukim? Mar says again, the first one you would think is only when there's no safek nefashos, when there's no potential to travel would be life-threatening. But here, for them to travel would be life-threatening. The second pasuk is referring to where they went into an enemy territory. So you're saying if there's a famine, travel even if it's potentially life-threatening. And therefore it says, we should go to the camp of the Aram, the enemies, if we'll survive, they will survive, and if not, we'll die anyway, so what's the difference? Brisa says, again, if there is plague in the city, a person should not walk in the middle of the road because the Malach HaMavis is given rights, and therefore he's unafraid and he walks openly in the middle of the road. If there is peace in the city, you shouldn't walk on the side of the road because that's where he's hanging out when he's not given the right to do what he wants. Another brisa says, if there's a plague in the city, a person should not go alone to shul because the Malach HaMavis leaves his tools there. And that's only if there's no class of children learning there and there's no minyan of asara there. But if you have those two things, then it's okay. Another brisa says if the dogs in the city are crying, that means that the Malach HaMavis, the angel of death, is coming to the city. If the dogs are laughing, it means Eliyahu Navi is coming into the city, and that's as long as there's no female there, because if there's a female, then the joy that they're showing is over that female, nothing to do with Eliyahu Navi. And the Gemara quotes an incident. The Gemara says that Rav Ami and Rav Asi were sitting in front of Rav Yitzchak Nafcha. One of them said, let's learn a sugya. The other one said, no, let's learn an agarata. So he started saying agarata, and the other one interrupted. So he started saying a sugya, and the first one interrupted. So he said, this is like a mashal of a man who was married to two women. One was young, and one was old. So the old one pulled out all his black hairs, and the young one pulled out all his white hairs. Either way, the bottom line was that he was losing his hair. So he ended up becoming bald from the two of them. So I can't say anything because of you and because of you, so we're not going to learn anything at all. So he said, you know what, I have something which is fitting for both of you. You'll both appreciate. It's one sugya that has within it both agarata and halacha. What is that? So the pasuk that we've been discussing, kiseitzi eish umasa kaitim. So kiseitzi means it goes out on its own. So this is referring to al pi agarata. It's referring to Klal Yisrael, the sins and the Kadosh Baruch Hu destroying the Beis Hamikdash. That it goes out on its own. It means it's not that Hashem destroyed it, but it's that us who did. Hashem is not responsible for it, as it were, because it's kiseitzi. It goes out on its own. And then, Shalom Yishalom HaMaver Sabeira, still, the one who caused it is bearing responsibility. And that's a Kadosh Baruch Hu who is saying that it's my responsibility because of this fire that I set in Tzion. Like it says, V'yatzes eish b'tzion, v'atoichal yisvei deisel. And I am going to rebuild it with fire, like it says, V'ani eya l'cha choymas eish saviv l'chvoid eya b'seicha. So therefore, you see, Hashem is taking responsibility as if it was Him who built it. Because like the pasuk says, Kiseitze eish, goes out on its own, but Shalom Yishalom HaMaver Sabeira, the person who set the fire is responsible. Starts off referring to where it happened on its own, and then ends up speaking as if someone had actually set the fire. Now, what's the halacha about this? So halachically, this anomaly in the pasuk is teaching me that Aish counts as one's arrow, that it refers to it as if it goes out on its own, and it's traveling on its own, but we halachically view it as if someone fired it as an arrow, and the nafkamina is that he has to pay the daled dvarim nezek, besides for nezek tzari, posheves, and vaishas. And now the Gemara goes into a whole different sugya of David HaMelech, psukim which the Gemara interprets homiletically about the halachos of Aish. What's happening over there was that David HaMelech asked for water from the Machane Pelishtim, and they brought him water, and he refused to drink it. The Gemara understands that he was sending a shaila, and he did not accept the answer to some extent. So the Psukim say as follows: David was thirsty, and he said, "Who's going to bring me water from the well of Beis Lechem, Asher B'Shar, which is at the gate?" Three strong men broke into the camp of the Pelishtim. They drew water from the well of Beis Lechem, Asher B'Shar, and then they brought it to him, and he refused to drink it. So the Gemara says this is not meant to be taken literally, or if it is, we're going to have another pshat here, Al Pi Agada, and that's that he was asking for the shar. He was asking for the Sanhedrin, who sit at the shar, to paskin a shaila. And then for some reason he didn't accept the answer that they brought. So what was happening here? So a few explanations. Rava says the shaila he was asking was Talmud Be'esh, where there are things that are hidden inside and a fire gets set on them. He wanted to know, is the halacha like Yehuda that Talmud Be'esh is chayiv? So halacha like the Rabbanan, Talmud Be'esh is pater? And they answered him whatever they answered him. He had a situation where a fire was being set to someone's property, and he wanted to know, his men had set fire to someone's property, and he wanted to know, are they chayav to pay for the things that were inside the Gadish? Now, that is Rava's pshat. Rav Huna says slightly different pshat. What happened was that there was a pile of barley, because the Psukim speak about the barley, and it belonged to Yisrael, and the Pelishtim were hiding in it. And David HaMelech wanted to set fire to it in order to kill or flush out those Pelishtim. And his shaila was, am I allowed to ruin someone else's property in order to save myself? So he sent this shaila, and they sent back to him, look, al pi halacha, you're not allowed to. A general halacha is that someone is not allowed to save himself at the cost of someone else's property. However, David HaMelech, you are the king, and the melech is allowed to take over anyone's property that he wants. You can break through and make a road for yourself wherever you want to. You have the right of eminent domain, and therefore no one's going to stop you, and therefore you're allowed to. Now, the Rabbanon say a third pshat, or perhaps it's Rabba Bar Mari, the Gemara says, who says this, that there was Gedishim of Sa'irim that belonged to Yisrael, and there were Gedishim of Adashim, lentils that belonged to Pelishtim. And he wanted to know, can I take the barley of the Yisrael, which I need to feed my animals, I'll pay him back because I'm going to capture the Adashim from the Pelishtim, and then I'll give that to the Yisrael. Can I take away his barley for my use, and I'll pay him back with Adashim? Can I switch? That was the question that he asked. And the answer was that somebody who steals wants to pay back with something else, he can't. He's a Rasha. Even if you steal and you do pay back, you're still a Rasha. But you are the king, and therefore you're allowed to commandeer property from anyone that you want, and no one's going to stop you. So these are the pshatim and the psukim. Now the Gemara analyzes the advantages of each one. So Gemara says, according to the last pshat that he was asking about switching barley for adashim. Now I understand why there's a pasuk in Shmuel that describes this, and a pasuk in Divrei Yam that describes it. One talks about barley, one talks about adashim, because there was two. There was a pile of barley and a pile of adashim, and he was asking about switching. But according to the other pshatim, why is it talk about two different things, adashim and sa'irim? So my answer is because there were two piles. Both stories were true. There were Pelishtim hiding in each of them, and the Shai was asked on each of them. And now the Gemara asks the other way. According to the pshat, that he wanted to set fire to them. So what it says afterwards is that he would not allow them to set fire. And he saved it, so I understand he saved it because he didn't set fire to it. However, according to the pshat, that he was just asking about switching, he didn't save anything. Or says, no, it is called that he saved, because he saved it from being switched to sa'irim instead of the barley. Says Gemara, according to the first two pshatim, I understand why he asked from psukim. He was asking pshat on the psukim. But according to the opinion that it was Taman Be'esh that he was asking, what did psukim have to do with it? So Gemara says he was asking two things. He was asking the shayla of Taman Be'esh, and he was also asking the shayla from the psukim. Next, the Gemara asks, according to the pshat, that he was asking about Taman Be'esh, why did he not accept it? It says he didn't want to drink it. It means he didn't want to accept the answer. Why didn't he want to accept the answer? The question was Taman Be'esh, and he got an answer about Taman Be'esh. It's an open halacha. The other ones, you understand, he didn't want to switch. He didn't want to set a fire to it because they said it's only because you are the king. You can understand why he didn't want to accept it. But this one, what did he not want to accept? And where it says he didn't want to accept to say it in their name. He said, I have a Messiah from the Vezin of Shmuel Haramasi, anyone who gives himself over to die al pi divrei Torah, you don't say halacha in his name. Whereas last kasha is that it ends off and it says vayasach isim lashem, according to the opinions that it was taman be'esh. What is vayasach isim lashem? According to the other ones, they understand he was moister nefesh, not to go with the halacha that they allowed it just because he was a king. According to these, what is the mesiras nefesh here? So the Gemara says that he said it over in their names.